When I returned from a 3-night, 4-day trip overseas, Ozawa, who runs a high-end restaurant in my apartment, was waiting for me. "I'm going to sue you for interfering with my business." To summarize what Ozawa said, who was furious, it seems that he claims that I broke into the restaurant through the back door and turned off the circuit breaker. I just got back from overseas. I wasn't in Japan, so there's no way I could have broken into the restaurant and turned off the circuit breaker. Before I left, I broke into my restaurant, turned off the circuit breaker, harassed you, and then fled overseas. I know everything. No matter how I explain it, Ozawa seems to want to decide that I'm the culprit. If you insist, I have an idea. I spread out what was there. My name is Yamada Makoto, and I'm an office worker. I used to work for a small and medium-sized company in the countryside, but I got a qualification in order to further improve my skills. I changed jobs to a major company this spring. My new workplace is full of people, and just stepping in makes me stand up straight. The work has become more difficult and challenging due to the higher salary, but I enjoy the environment where I can demonstrate my abilities more than that. However, there was one problem for me. I had been living with my parents in the countryside, so I had no experience of living alone. There were so many things I didn't know, such as how to rent a room or how to sign up for water, gas, and electricity. On top of that, there was a mountain of paperwork that came with changing jobs and moving, and time flew by as I was busy and working hard to get everything done. I prioritized handing over my work and saying hello to my new company, and as the day came to move, I still hadn't decided on a place to live, leaving me exhausted. It was President Matsuyama, who was retiring from the company this year, who spoke to me. "What's wrong, Yamada? Why do you look so tired?" President, when I told him that I hadn't decided where to move, he thought for a moment and then put his hand on my shoulder. "If you'd like, I can show you around my apartment. I happen to have a room open. If you'd like, please do." I bow my head enthusiastically to the light of salvation that I had unexpectedly found. Then the president laughed heartily and looked mischievous. But there were two problems with that apartment. One was that the room we could rent was on the second floor, but there was a restaurant right below. The customers would be noisy and we might have to be careful. "No problem at all." I said yes. Even if I were to live there, I would be working at the office most of the day, so I would only go to this room to sleep. It wouldn't matter to me how much noise you make during the day. The president nodded in satisfaction at my enthusiastic response, but then his face quickly became serious. And then there was another problem. This one might be even more troublesome. Even after hearing this, do you think you would still be able to live there? What is it? Tell me. I swallowed hard at the president's unusual aura. Then the president opened his mouth with his eyebrows quirked. It was that the owner, that is, me, was living next door to the apartment. This spring, an old man who retired and has too much free time will be living right next door. I couldn't help but burst out laughing at the president's mischievous words. If the president is there, it's a very expensive property. Please let me move in. And so I joined a large company in the spring. At the same time, I started living alone for the first time in my life in an apartment owned by Matsuyama-san, who had just retired. As Matsuyama-san had introduced, the room I had signed up for was on the second floor, and a high-end restaurant was open on the first floor directly below. It seemed like the smell of bread being baked was wafting in from early in the morning, but I didn't notice it because the balcony was closed. If something happened, I could rest easy knowing Matsuyama-san lived next door. That's what I thought, but it was too early to feel relieved. That's because I found out that Ozawa Hiroyuki, who runs the high-end restaurant all by himself, seems to be a troubled person. Every time we ran into each other when I was taking out the trash in the morning, Ozawa would say, "Since you live nearby, please buy some for us." Well, I work from early in the morning until just before the last train, so I can't really stop by the restaurant very often. It would be perfect if I bought some in the morning and had it for lunch. Please try it once. It was a promise. Tenno Koza looks a little younger than me, so he's probably in his late 30s. No matter how much I refuse, he keeps coming at me and trying to get me to buy his high-end food packs. If this keeps up, he'll keep pestering me until I buy one. Thinking this, I finally gave in and went to buy some food packs on a day off. The store smelled delicious bread, but when I looked into the shelves, I was shocked and couldn't believe my eyes because, as expected of high-end products, they all cost 1,000 yen each. The whole food packs were also very filling and I couldn't finish them all. When I looked to the side, I saw half-sized food packs like those often sold at convenience stores. They were authentic, as they were high-end. I asked if I could have the half-sized ones since I live alone. Ozawa tried to get me to buy the whole packs by saying things like, "There's no difference between a whole and a half-sized one, and our food packs are so delicious that half the size won't be enough," but he reluctantly handed me the half-sized ones. The rent for this apartment is cheap, so please buy some bread at my shop instead. Come again. It's a promise. I felt really bad when he said that. It's true that I'm busy with work, and I don't have the hobby of wasting my precious time on holidays to buy a lot of bread. That's why I never visited Ozawa's shop again. But even after that, Ozawa would still ask me to buy him bread every time we saw each other, which didn't make me feel very good. But then something happened that made me forget all about Ozawa. It was about a year after I moved. I had gotten used to working at the office, and I was finally settling into my unfamiliar life on my own, so I was relieved, but then I looked at the receipt for my electricity bill and my eyes widened. What? My electricity bill is 100,000 yen. I've only been living a normal life, so why has it gone up so much? I hurriedly pulled out the electricity bill up to the previous month. It had been about the same every month, at just over 5,000 yen, since I moved in a year ago. Had the regular rate suddenly gone up this month? Or had a receipt for someone else been mistakenly sent to the post? However, my name was clearly listed on Athena, and the basic charge hadn't changed. Only the electricity bill had increased by an order of magnitude. I looked around my room, not understanding what was going on. Even when I was living with my parents in the countryside, my monthly electricity bill was just over 10,000 yen. So it was impossible for me to pay an outrageous fee that was about 10 times higher even though I was living alone. If I had to pay 100,000 yen every month, I would have to start living frugally from now on. I was completely at my wit's end, but no matter how I thought about it, it didn't seem right. I'd never left the air conditioner on, and I let my laundry dry naturally, so I didn't use the dryer either. I didn't remember doing anything in particular that would increase the bill, so I was left scratching my head wondering what could be the cause. I thought about contacting the power company, but there was a reason I couldn't take action right away. In fact, I had an even bigger event on the horizon. It was the chance to go on a 3-night, 4-day trip abroad, which I had gotten for the first time in my first year since changing jobs. My boss, who had seen my hard work over the past year, had introduced me to a local company so that I could have a good experience overseas. The departure was tomorrow. Therefore, I wanted to concentrate on my work and decided that I could deal with the electricity bill issue after I returned home. The meter that measures electricity usage might be broken. If it was a local power, it would be dangerous, so I thought I would turn off the circuit breaker while I was away. I had been eating out a lot and hadn't cooked at home, so my refrigerator was empty and I hadn't even made ice. The other rooms didn't seem to be particularly inconvenienced by the lack of electricity, so I thought I would turn off all the electricity in my room and leave. So on the morning of my departure, I turned off all the circuit breakers and left the house. During my trip, I gained experience at a dizzying pace, inspecting sites, interacting with partner companies, and conducting market research. It was so busy that it felt like I was on a business trip rather than a vacation, but I was so busy running around trying to increase my knowledge that I was slow to notice the voicemail on my cell phone. Huh? It's from Matsuyama. I didn't notice the call because I was outside. When I checked the voicemail that was recorded, I could hear Matsuyama's voice, sounding anxious in the middle of the night. Where is Yamada right now? If it's Kaku, come back right away. As I said at the beginning, Matsuyama is the owner of the apartment I rented and lives next door. I wondered if something had happened to my room, but I still had plans and couldn't go home even if I wanted to. On top of that, there were no seats available on the return flight, and the earliest departure was the day after tomorrow morning, which was only about 5 hours before I was scheduled to return. There was no point in looking back at my reservation with only 5 hours left. There's nothing I can do about this. I should probably contact Matsuyama. To make matters worse, my cell phone plan has a high overseas call charge. So, even though I felt bad for Matsuyama, I decided to continue my overseas trip. I'm going back the day after tomorrow, so I'm sorry to Matsuyama, but I'm going to enjoy my experience abroad to the very end. And so I returned home as planned. I was worried about what had happened in my room as I headed home, but I stopped in front of my apartment. Waiting there were Matsuyama, the owner, and Ozawa, the owner of the high-end restaurant on the first floor. Ozawa, his face bright red, was waving his arms around wildly and stamping his feet as he pleaded with Matsuyama about something. Matsuyama, listening to him, had a stern expression on his face and folded his arms. What do you want? When I approached Matsuyama and asked, Ozawa suddenly interrupted. Don't mess with me, it's no use pretending not to. You're interfering with my business, and I'm going to sue you. Ozawa snapped at me with great force, but I had no idea what was going on. I looked at Matsuyama's face in confusion, and Matsuyama let out a big sigh and began to speak in a halting manner. Ozawa, the owner of the high-end restaurant, claims that Yamada broke into the store through the back door and turned off the circuit breaker. Do you have any evidence that I broke into the store? Hearing something I had never expected made me more surprised than angry. As I stare at him intently, Matsuyama rubs his neck awkwardly. Oh, he says there's no evidence or proof. But Ozawa still says he'll call the police, so I, the owner, listened to what he had to say first. Matsuyama explains in a thoughtful tone, but Ozawa cuts him off. We don't need proof. This guy's too busy to go back to his room. It wouldn't be strange if he got stressed out or took it out on others when they couldn't sleep. Ozawa points at me and spits out as he argues. After all, this guy only came to my store once, looked down on me, and left. He never came back. He's the only one who holds a grudge against my store. Ozawa's arguments are completely incomprehensible. Even if he says that, I just got back from overseas. He wasn't in Japan, so there's no way he could have broken into the store and turned off the circuit breaker. I wonder. Before leaving, he must have broken into my store, turned off the circuit breaker, harassed me, and then fled overseas. He must have been lurking around and setting up a place for himself. I know everything. No matter how I explain it, Ozawa seems to want to decide that I'm the culprit. Meanwhile, Matsuyama, who's sandwiched between me and Ozawa, tilts his head at the divider, looking unconvinced. Yamada isn't a bad person. He's just good looking on the outside. Don't be fooled, boss. Ozawa crossed his arms and looked down at me as he said something outrageous. This guy is a terrible person who runs around noisily from early in the morning, and he even leaves his own trash in front of my store without permission. I've been putting up with his lack of manners and common sense, and now he's become even more ungrateful. I never thought he'd say something so blunt and unreasonable. I didn't mean to be noisy in the morning, and the story about trash is a complete lie. But Ozawa glared at me with a sullen look and continued to say even more outrageous things. The story about him going overseas is also suspicious. Maybe he didn't actually travel, but did something bad other than what happened at my store and fled Japan. Don't say rude things based on your imagination. What Mr. Ozawa is saying is just a delusion. If you speak ill of someone without any evidence, I'll sue you for damage to reputation. Didn't you think I would fight back? Ozawa flinched for a moment. At that moment, Mr. Matsuyama slowly spoke up. Mr. Yamada is currently working at the company where I used to work. His background is solid, and he's not the kind of person who would do bad things. Mr. Matsuyama spoke politely, as if he were talking to a child, but Ozawa just sneered at his explanation. I don't know how he got on their good side, but it seems like he's trusted quite a bit. But we often see stories on the news about people committing terrible crimes due to stress at work. Are you that type of person too? It seems like Ozawa is determined to insist that I rebelled. I sighed, glanced at Ozawa, and steeled myself. I don't really care what kind of work he thinks it is. But I'm going to sue Mr. Ozawa. Even though he's already been honored. Huh? If you say something inappropriate, I'll really call the police. Ozawa glared back at me with even more determination. But was it my imagination? His face seemed to be gradually turning paler. It was just as well since I was planning to report it to the police when I returned home. I don't mind if you call the police here and now. Ozawa was visibly shaken by my calm demeanor. He moved his eyes from side to side, and started to say something, but then kept his mouth shut and fidgeted. Unable to bear it any longer, I cut him straight to the chase. There's a power outlet for the balcony in my room. Our electricity comes from that outlet, right? Ozawa's face went blank at my question and he stopped moving. Judging from his reaction, it was obvious that he had been stealing electricity. And Matsuyama's face turned even sterner as soon as he heard what I said. What the heck, taking electricity without permission? That's a serious crime, Mr. Ozawa. Ozawa, who had been insulting me with the opposite sex until just a moment ago, was now silent with his mouth tightly pursed, as if it were a lie. His face was pale, but his eyes were moving around, so he was probably trying hard to come up with an excuse in his head. Not wanting to give him a chance, I pressed him even harder. I don't usually use the balcony at all, so I keep it closed all the time. So I had never used the balcony outlet since moving in, but I never imagined that the person living below would use it without permission. How was it being used? Matsuyama came to me curiously, so I showed him a photo I had taken with my cell phone. The photo clearly showed a large, thick, industrial-looking outlet plugged into the balcony power supply. The second photo was of the base of the outlet. It was the part where the adapter that converts household plugs to industrial ones was attached. Furthermore, if you follow the outlet in the video, you can see that it leads from the back door of the high-end restaurant on the first floor to the inside of the store. This is definitely an outlet from the store below. It's pretty bad to go to the trouble of digging up a household outlet so that it can be used for business purposes. Matsuyama frowned and muttered as he looked at the photos and videos over and over again. When my electricity bill suddenly got so high, I thought it was strange, so I looked into it that day. That's when I found this. Can you explain what this is all about? The president stared at Kozo with a stern expression. But he looked away and began to say random things as if he was unconcerned. I don't know. Maybe one of the part-timers did it on his own. What's the point of keeping an eye on me? You can't afford to hire a part-timer. Everyone who lives around here knows that your store is struggling financially. When he said this, Ozawa didn't answer and just kept stomping on the name of the place. Matsuyama gave Ozawa a cold look as he became angry and started acting out. When you first started your high-end restaurant, the neighbors used to come here a lot. They used to come to your store often because they thought you were a young guy who was working hard to run the store. Ozawa didn't respond to Matsuyama's words, and instead spat. Matsuyama was taken aback by Ozawa's attitude, but he continued talking. But did you mistake that for your own ability? You were serving customers with such an arrogant attitude. That's why the neighbors gradually distanced themselves from you. Quote. Was Matsuyama right? Ozawa stared at the ground and then stopped moving altogether. His attitude looked like a small child sulking, and I suddenly felt that Ozawa's selfish behavior up until now might have stemmed from his mental immaturity. Do you remember what you said to the customers who came to visit you back then? You used to complain to customers who bought your bread that it wasn't food for poor people and that you were a country bumpkin who didn't understand the difference between luxury and luxury. Matsuyama spoke quietly to his young subordinate, as if understanding him. I took you in because you said you had finally gotten rid of your bad friends and wanted to start your own business and start your life over. You were always violent since you were a child, and by the time you went to middle school, you were probably in trouble with the police. That's why I tried to get my own restaurant and start over. Ozawa raised his voice angrily, but Matsuyama let out another big sigh at his attitude, which showed no sign of remorse. When you came back here, all the neighbors discussed whether we should accept you. But we all agreed to support you because you were serious about being reborn and working hard to open a high-class restaurant. Matsuyama looked at Ozawa with sad eyes. Ozawa kept his head down and muttered, "I didn't ask you to do this, and you've been running your restaurant properly up until now," but he couldn't seem to look up. "Your bad attitude is the reason we lost customers. It's all your own fault that your restaurant is not doing well anymore." Ozawa clenched his eyes and turned his face away, as if he didn't want to hear Matsuyama's story. "I know you have a hard time managing your finances, but that's also your own fault. You shouldn't steal electricity from Yamada's room. The power to the store went out because I turned off the circuit breaker and went out. When I called out to him, Ozawa glared at me as if he had just remembered something and started yelling. My water supply was in trouble because you turned off the circuit breaker as a form of harassment. The food we bought went bad because the refrigerator stopped working, and we suffered a lot of damage. It all started because you stole our electricity, right? There's also clear evidence that you stole other things." With that, he showed Ozawa and Matsuyama the security camera footage he had installed to cover the veranda. It showed Ozawa trespassing on my veranda while I was away on a trip overseas. Ozawa, irritated, unplugged and replugged the power cord he had been stealing electricity from, then boldly wiped up the things I had left on the veranda and took them back without permission. No matter how you look at it, this is the scene where you stole my things. You sold everything you took on the internet, didn't you? The things that were stolen were the outdoor gear I had stored on the veranda. I also identified Mr. Ozawa's account earlier. The outdoor equipment sold here has my initials on it, so it seems that its value has decreased and it won't sell for that much." After listening to my words to the end, Mr. Matsuyama's face turned red and he started to get angry. So he stole not only the equipment but also the items? No matter how you look at it, it's a crime. How are you going to make excuses to your deceased parents? Even though Mr. Matsuyama yelled at him, Ozawa just walked away with a sad expression on his face. Mr. Matsuyama let out a big sigh and turned to me and bowed his head. "I'm really sorry. This guy has lived in the neighborhood with his parents for a long time. Since he lost his parents at an early age, he's been acting badly. I've been the one taking the lead in looking after him as a whole community, but I've caused trouble for Mr. Yamada." Mr. Matsuyama kept his head down and shook his shoulders. With more than a hint of sadness, Mr. Matsuyama continued talking. "This guy came back from the city and bowed to me because he wanted to start a business. At first, I was happy that he had become normal, but eventually, the people in the area abandoned him, and Ozawa, despite the fact that it was his own fault, remained sullen and silent, refusing to look at me. Matsuyama could only watch him sadly. From then on, without us being able to help him, he did whatever he wanted. No matter what I said, he just resisted, and I didn't know what to do anymore. I placed my hand on Matsuyama's back as if to comfort him as he complained. Then, Ozawa opened his mouth as if he had given up. "If you hate me that much, I'm just leaving. I'm going to be chased by debt collectors anyway. I was planning to make a killing at this store." Ozawa tried to leave with his mouth pouting. But I spoke firmly. "I feel bad asking you about the situation, but you still have to pay the electricity bill. You have to pay for what you stole from me. Make amends for your crimes. If you keep running away like this, you'll never be saved." Matsuyama's words were harsh, but they were only natural considering what Ozawa had done. No matter what his past may be, the crimes Ozawa committed will never disappear. He can't pay. He stole because he had no money. A respectable company employee like you probably wouldn't understand. I calmly spoke to Oza, who spat out his words. First, you should apologize since you did something wrong. Then, you can change your mindset and do your best starting tomorrow. Ozawa stopped moving as if he had heard unexpected words. I looked him in the eyes and nodded firmly. The crimes he committed won't disappear, and the past won't change. But tomorrow comes to everyone equally. People can always start over. Hearing my words, Ozawa collapsed to his knees and fell to the ground. A slightly resentful voice escaped his mouth as he looked down. After that, Ozawa left without saying a word, but his profile was filled with a determination that was different from his previous one. And the next day, an envelope containing 200,000 yen was in my mailbox. It must have been the combined cost of the electricity bill and the money he had to pay for the things he had stolen from the balcony. In the end, Ozawa disappeared from town without ever having the chance to meet him in person. Later, Matsuyama told me that he had started working seriously. He was working hard at a hard physical labor site, gradually paying off his debts. And thanks to the knowledge and experience I had gained overseas, I was promoted at work. As things got busier, I decided to rent a new room near the company, so I went to say my final goodbyes to Matsuyama. I'll miss you when you move out. I'm really sorry about Ozawa. I hope that once he's paid off his debts, he'll finally start living seriously. I replied quietly and looked up at the sky. Cherry blossoms were waiting from somewhere, carried on the refreshing spring breeze. The season was approaching its umpteenth spring since I had lived here.